Why don't we rise as we hear the word of the Lord from our gospel today? This is from the 13th chapter of John, starting with the 31st verse. When he had gone out, Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and will glorify him at once. Little children, I am with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and as I said to the Jews, so now I say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another, just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." Please be seated. Good morning. Again. All right. So today our gospel is familiar and it's brief. Our message today is to love one another. Pastor Reason said this is like Christian wallpaper to us, right? We see it, but we don't see it. I mean, it's there. We know it's there. We hear it all the time. But it's just something we're used to. But these words that seem so ridiculously easy to understand can also be ridiculously hard to do. See, we're bombarded every day from every angle, every side, and we have been for a really long time, with this prevailing attitude of me first. Me, 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 me. The 1970s coined the term, for those of you who grew up in the 1970s, like me, the term the me generation, right? You familiar with that, some of you? This phrase kind of caught on because it became glaringly clear in our culture that self-realization and self-fulfillment seemed, among many, to be of higher importance than meeting the greater needs of others in society. And still today, all around us is this message that achievement is personal, okay? That success is measured by how many of our own goals are met. Me time takes priority over anything else, because if you don't take care of yourself, who will? And entitlement is the word of the day. And guess what? We take selfies as if we are training for an Olympic event. I mean, that's all we do. It's all about me. It sounds bad, but hear the good news. We hear a message of radical hope in today's gospel. There's another way to be. Because Jesus was completely different. His focus constantly remained on others, and because of it, he radically changed the world. So this section of the Gospel of John begins with the story of glorification in the cross, resurrection, and ascension. Okay? And it begins with the account of the Last Supper and a summary in these three words. And it starts in chapter 13 with the first verse, having said, "Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end." And as this particular passage starts, Jesus has already washed the feet of his disciples like a servant. Judas has departed into the night to betray Jesus. And he knows that Peter's also going to do this. And so in this time of confusion and drama, Jesus offers these words to his closest people, his friends, his disciples. He says, "I give you a new commandment, that you love one another, just as I have loved you, and you should love one another. And so by this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." That's how they're going to know that you're attached to me. So in contrast to a world filled with inward focus and self-absorption, I ask you, what's love got to do with it? Got to do with it. What's love but a secondhand emotion? Tina turned in 1884. Okay, so if you grew up in the 70s, you also kind of went to school in the 80s, so you heard that too. Some of you remember this. But really, what kind of love is Jesus talking about here? This surely isn't a romantic love, nor is it about being nice, nor is it only about loving those who love you back, because that's pretty easy. Think about it. When Jesus washed the disciples' feet, Judas was there. He washed Judas's feet. And Jesus knew what he was going to do. But he did it anyway. No special words for him, no warnings, no holding back. He washed his feet just like everyone else's. And further, he's now, we're going to hear, demonstrate just how much God loves the world by dying for those who really do not love him. The same people who cheered his arrival were yelling, "Crucify him." But he goes to the cross for just those people. You see, love is hard because love isn't about a second-hand emotion. True love is self-sacrificing. It means putting the good of others first, even when it hurts, even to the end. Now, I find it hard to believe that these are the words that Jesus leaves with his disciples, like, love one another. Because if I were him, I would have been giving a lot of instructions. That's what I do when I leave the house. I say I love you, but I'm like, and do this and do that, and make sure this gets done, right? But this is what Jesus did. He knew what was going to happen, and so wouldn't he want to make stronger instructions? Like, he doesn't say, like, go and die with me, or keep the faith, or when I'm gone, go out and teach and preach and save the world, or any number of things. Instead, he offers these simple and challenging words: love one another. Why? Because this kind of love is the hallmark not just of God and Jesus, but also of the whole Christian church. Some of you may remember an old camp song, "They will know we are Christians by their love." And now you will be singing it all afternoon because I've been singing it all week. But this is true, right? This is it. They will know we are Christians by our love. Jesus agrees that the whole world will know we are Christians, not by our sermons, not by our sacraments, or our festivals, or our buildings, or our crucifixes, or the type of worship music we listen to, or play, or even our family values, but by our love. It's just that simple, and it's just that important, and it's just that hard. Hard love. The Reverend Joachim Alexandropoulos, and that is a mouthful for Sunday morning. He was an Orthodox priest on a Greek isle during World War II. And the Nazis came to him one day, demanding that he provide them the next day with a list of every Jew that was living on the island. We all know what they wanted to do with that. And so the next day, he handed them a list containing one name. It was his own. He is now memorialized in the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. He loved them to the end, and this is hard love indeed. Jack and Phyllis, they've been married for more than 70 years. Sadly, she's suffering from dementia. She's been living in the nursing home for quite a few years. Jack visits his wife every day, reading from a series of diaries that he's kept since their early meeting, before they were even married. And this way he keeps connected with her. Sometimes she does recognize him. Most of the time she doesn't, but she smiles when he reads. This is hard love to the end. 2 weeks ago in Highlands Ranch, Colorado, 3 days before the last day of school, the students were inside their classroom. They were watching a movie when one of their classmates walked in and pulled a gun out. And in that moment, Kendrick Castillo lunged to stop the gunman and was shot dead. Kendrick's split-second decision to lunge for the gunman gave other students the opportunity to flee. This is hard love, and this is hard for us to imagine to the end. You see, this passage and these few illustrations remind us that we actually can and often do love one another in this "it's all about me" world. I mean, sometimes the love command seems so challenging that we assume it's an ideal, a lofty goal that none of us can really, really reach. But while we may not love perfectly, as Jesus did, we do love. And sometimes one of the most powerful things that you can hear in relation to this command are the stories of radical love, bringing affirmation to our ability to keep this commandment. So think for a moment about your week. When did you make the choice to love others as Jesus asked in this past week? Maybe you chose to help a coworker with some extra work, or even though it wasn't convenient for you. Perhaps you overlooked the slight of a friend and you absorbed the hurt without fighting back. Did you put aside your own needs or goals to help someone else achieve theirs? Did you give a little more than you anticipated, put aside something you wanted for the sake of providing for someone else? Did you let someone out in traffic, at least? Right? Maybe it was a large act of love this week, or maybe it was very small. But each of us, I would bet, did in fact love one another in this past week. Now, on the flip side of that, and you knew I was getting to that, for a moment, let's think about the times that love was difficult, that it was hard to love one another. Maybe it's been incredibly hard to forgive someone who's hurt you, or difficult to move past a disappointment caused by a family member or a friend. Perhaps your own needs have been so overwhelming that you have not been able to see past them to the needs of others around you. Maybe we all struggled a little bit with loving others this past week as well. It's important to remember that our successes and our shortcomings here, because the truth of the matter is this: we do love regularly, and we do fail regularly. Realistically, it's challenging to love one another, whether it is within our families, among our friends, in our community, because we're with people who are dramatically different from us, and that makes loving very difficult. Nevertheless, loving one another is possible because of our gospel, because our God lives within us, always, every day. So after washing his disciples' feet, Jesus demonstrated the ultimate picture of sacrificial love by giving his very life for those who did not deserve it. Jesus taught the disciples how to love by the actual act of loving them. He did it. He didn't talk about it. He didn't instruct about it. He did it. Subsequently, Jesus called his disciples and us to show love for one another. And the disciples' loving actions would teach the entire world about God's love. So what could our loving actions do? Who could we teach about God's love today? Jesus could not be clearer in his message. It is not about our theological correctness, not about our moral purity, not about our impressive knowledge, that everyone will know that we are his disciples. It is quite simply about our acts of love, acts of service and sacrifice, day by day, moment by moment, that point to the love of God for this world, made known in Jesus Christ. May the peace of the Lord be with you. We're going to take this time now for our offering.